Elias Thorne's weather-beaten waterproof bag, stiff with dried sea salt and years of hard labor, looked painfully out of place on the pristine white suede bench, inside CEO Valeria Sterling's multi-million-dollar expedition submersible. To Valeria, it was an eyesore in a world reserved for wealth and privilege. Without a moment's hesitation, she ordered her head of security to search the bag in full view of the crew, treating Elias not as a respected professional, but as an unwanted drifter who had somehow slipped into a realm meant only for the elite. Elias did not resist. He simply glanced at the $60 million submersible gleaming outside the glass wall of the private dock and said, "Be careful with what lies in the innermost compartment." When that item was pulled out, the entire cabin sank into silence. Because the dive had just been officially suspended. The Mariana Apex Maritime Floating Station was not just a dock. It was a fortress of tempered steel and anti-glare glass bobbing gently on the tranquil waters of the Maldives. Here, the boundary between the grandeur of nature and the arrogance of humanity was blurred. The seawater was jade green, so crystal clear that one could see coral reefs tens of meters deep. But what truly captivated every eye was the machine moored at the central pier. The abyssal Sovereign expedition submersible. Valued at $60 million, the Sovereign looked more like a spaceship than a maritime vessel. Its outer hull, made of flawlessly polished titanium alloy, reflected the blazing tropical sun. The passenger cabin was a sphere of ultra-durable acrylic glass, upholstered inside with snow-white suede trimmed with carbon fiber, and equipped with perfectly anti-vibration crystal glasses. Its magnetic drive engine emitted a low hum, creating ripples that spread across the water's surface. The technical and service crew on the dock, dressed in tailored blue uniforms, moved with urgency but absolute silence. There was no shouting, no clanking of tools. In this world, every sound was calculated, because every passing second on this floating station belonged to people who measured time in millions of dollars. And no one measured perfection more strictly than Valeria Sterling. The sound of rotor blades tearing through the wind dispelled the quiet atmosphere as a sleek black helicopter, bearing the S logo, landed on the helipad atop the floating station. The smell of aviation fuel instantly overpowered the scent of sea salt. The helicopter door opened and Valeria Sterling stepped out. She was draped in a hand-woven silk robe that cost more than an average person's annual rent. Oversized sunglasses hid her piercing, cold eyes that always seemed to be evaluating everything around her. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled up in a bun with absolute discipline. Not a single strand was allowed out of place, perfectly reflecting how she ran the Sterling deep-sea resort empire. Two assistants hurried behind her, tightly clutching leather briefcases filled with documents. Standing on standby right at the submersible's hatch was Kaylin Cross, the head of security, along with two massive bodyguards standing with their hands clasped imposingly, like stone statues guarding the entrance to a queen's mausoleum. Today's 2,000-meter dive was not merely a shipwreck sightseeing tour. For Valeria, this was a coronation. The man waiting for her at the underwater resort was Arthur Pendleton, chairman of the Pendleton Global Investment Fund. If Arthur just signed the $200 million contract, Valeria's fleet of submersibles would rise to become the most exclusive and powerful deep-sea tourism empire on the planet. There was no room for error. There was no room for delay, however. Inside the chest of Julian Vance, Sterling's chief operating officer, was a ticking time bomb counting down, standing next to the hatch. Julian constantly wiped the sweat beading on his forehead despite the outdoor air conditioning system blowing icy air. The Sovereign's cabin pressure warning system had flashed a yellow error 3 times this past week. The internal maintenance technicians had run diagnostic software, cleared the error codes, and insisted it was merely sensor signal interference. But Julian had been in this industry long enough to know the ocean never has signal interference. Any variable at a depth of 2.0 meters could turn a $60 million machine into a titanium coffin in a millisecond. Julian had secretly made a distress call before dawn. Valeria had issued an ironclad order that this trip must proceed on schedule, and anyone daring to suggest a postponement would immediately have their industry credentials revoked. Julian did not dare argue with Valeria, but he also didn't dare gamble the lives of the CEO and the billionaire VIP guest. And then Julian's salvation appeared, but in the most disruptive way possible. Elias Thorne walked through the dock's security gate. Amidst a world designed with sleek lines and luxurious color palettes, Elias looked like a brutal scratch on a flawless painting. He wore a faded canvas jacket, the collar and elbows frayed from thousands of hours rubbing against rusty ship hulls. His rubber boots bore a crisscross of slash marks, the true testament of a man who spent more time in dark, dry docks than in brightly lit boardrooms. Slung over his shoulder was a faded gray waterproof canvas bag, stained with pitch-black machine oil and streaks of sea salt hardened over time. Elias did not walk in a hurry. He took the calm, steady steps of someone who had witnessed enough hull ruptures to understand one absolute truth. Human haste can never bend the pressure of water. He walked toward the boarding area, and Julian hastily rushed out to greet him with a stiff, sweat-drenched handshake. But Elias's arrival could not slip past Valeria's razor-sharp eyes, seeing Elias stepping past the red velvet rope. The CEO's expression shifted from perfect pride to utter contempt in a single breath. She took off her sunglasses, her eyes narrowing as if she had just seen a dead rat wash up on her private beach. In Valeria's frame of reference, a man dressed like a plumber had no right to breathe the same air as her, let alone step onto a one-of-a-kind submersible. Especially at a moment when a billionaire investor was about to evaluate its perfection, Elias paid no mind to those piercing stares. He didn't bow his head, didn't give a lengthy introduction, simply speaking to Julian in a flat tone. "I need to open the rear technical compartment and directly inspect the pressure valve manifold before this hatch closes." Julian nodded stammeringly, his restlessness as obvious as a man caught between a glowing ember and a powder keg. Instantly, Kalen Cross stepped forward. The head of security used his massive frame to block the path, crossing his arms over his chest with the intimidation of someone accustomed to using violence to solve problems. "Stop right there. Who are you? And what's in that trash bag?" Elias looked straight into Kalen's eyes without blinking. "Mechanical tools and documents directly related to this dive." Valeria had overheard the conversation. Her deep red lipstick-coated lips curled into a cold arc. Her annoyance immediately crystallized into an authoritative command striking straight into the space around the hatch. "Search his bag. Tear open every single compartment. No one is allowed to bring anything suspicious, filthy, or of unknown origin onto my ship. If he wants to step inside, he has to prove he's not a scavenger." Elias did not flinch. He didn't wave his hands in protest, didn't tense up defensively, nor did he loudly demand respect. He calmly slipped the worn canvas bag off his shoulder and placed it on the nearest tempered glass coffee table. A brutal contrast between the coarse, oil-stained fabric and the pristine crystal glass surface. He looked up, staring deep into Valeria's eyes, which were blazing with arrogance, and spoke in a light voice that carried the weight of an underwater reef. "You have the right to rummage through everything in here. But remember this well. Don't delude yourselves into thinking that after you open it, you will still have the courage to dive to the bottom of the sea." Kalen Cross smirked, a signature half-smile of those accustomed to using their muscles to intimidate others. He unzipped the worn canvas bag with theatrical slowness, intending to draw every eye on the dock to this degrading act. He pulled out each item, disdainfully throwing them onto the platinum-rimmed tempered glass coffee table inside the submersible's reception cabin. The sound of metal striking glass rang out dryly, a scratched flashlight, its black paint peeling off. A handheld ultrasonic pressure gauge wrapped in oil-stained canvas, a spiral-bound notebook covered in blue ink notes, a box of industrial markers, and a few titanium alloy bolts still sitting in a crumpled sealed plastic bag. Valeria Sterling crossed her arms over her chest, glancing over the pile of tools with unconcealed mockery. Her contempt became sharper with each pedestrian item pulled out. "You plan to maintain this $60 million submarine with a trash collection scavenged from a flea market?" Valeria asked mockingly, her cold tone slicing through the smooth hum of the magnetic engine. A few crew members standing nearby forced a laugh, the twisted smiles of people who found nothing funny but knew full well they had to play along with the one signing their paychecks. Elias Thorne did not fire back. His ash-gray eyes did not waver, nor did he bother looking at Valeria. His gaze was glued to Kalen's rough hands, patiently waiting for the security guard to reach the only thing of true value in that canvas bag. Kalen's hand reached deeper into the innermost compartment, a section lined with waterproof hard plastic. He paused for a beat, then pulled out a thick ash-gray envelope. It was not an ordinary document file. The envelope was sealed with a raised red wax stamp, catching the LED light in the cabin and flaring up like a warning flare in the dead of night. In the top left corner of the envelope was an emblem of crossed anchors, shielded by a laurel wreath, the supreme symbol of the International Maritime Safety Commission. And right below it, printed in red ink with bold capital letters that were impossible to misinterpret, Emergency dive suspension. Pending independent review, the atmosphere inside the abyssal sovereign cabin changed abruptly. As if a pressure relief valve had just burst open, the forced laughter died out. The space became so quiet that one could hear the ocean waves gently lapping against the steel pilings of the floating station. Julian Vance, the CO, went pale, drained of every drop of blood. He took a half step back, understanding all too well the legal power behind those red words. The captain, who had been monitoring the control panel from the glass cockpit, immediately turned completely around, his eyes glued to the document in the security guard's hand. Valeria frowned. She had yet to fully grasp the weight of what she was looking at, but the survival instinct of a seasoned businesswoman told her. The terrified reaction of the people around her was not a reaction to a meaningless piece of scratch paper. Kalen, whether out of stupidity or habit, raised his thumb to tear off the wax seal. "That seal bears my name," Elias spoke. His volume was very low, but its steely firmness forced everyone to hold their breath to listen. "If you break it outside of legal protocols, the first thing we do this morning won't be diving into the sea. The first thing will be a federal hearing to see who dared to violate top-secret maritime safety documents." Kalen's finger froze in midair. His arrogant confidence retreated, giving way to a bewildered unease. He clumsily set the envelope down on the table as if it were on fire. Julian stepped forward, his voice trembling as he read aloud the name printed on the routing line at the bottom of the envelope: Elias Thorne, Independent Maritime Structural Inspector. That title hovered in the recycled air of the dive cabin like a death sentence for Valeria's schedule. This was not an itinerant mechanic here to beg for an odd repair job. This was the Grim Reaper of shipping lines, a government-approved inspector holding ultimate power. The right to freeze the operations of any maritime vessel, whether commercial or private, until an independent board certified it safe. Valeria blinked rapidly, trying to regain her veneer of power. She crossed her arms tighter and tilted her chin up. "That must be an expired piece of paper or some ancient ID card you carry around to inflate yourself. My ship just passed its inspection last month." Elias looked at her without yielding an inch. "This document is not expired. It was officially issued at 6:10 a.m. this morning, right after your cabin pressure system recorded a micro-leak incident for the third time in 7 days. The suspension order takes effect the exact second this seal is stamped, and no power on Earth can lift it except me." The captain immediately reached out and flipped a red switch on the control panel. The hum of the magnetic engine slowly died out completely. He cleared his throat. "I apologize, Miss Sterling. I cannot allow the ship to submerge even a single meter below the surface until I review all of Mr. Thorne's files. Maritime safety regulations do not bend for anyone's schedule, not even the owner's." In less than 3 minutes, Valeria went from being a queen standing at the pinnacle of power, ordering the search of others, to being bound tightly by the very rules she had always trampled beneath her heels. The story steps back a few hours earlier, to a dilapidated corrugated tin-roofed repair shop tucked away near the edge of the industrial port. At 4:30 a.m., Elias was replacing an oil-soaked hydraulic gasket for a tugboat when his brick-like cell phone vibrated violently on his workbench. His son, Nolan, had texted from the night before. "It's my birthday today. Are you coming home for dinner, Dad?" Elias hastily wiped his grease-stained hands and texted back, "I have to inspect a stubborn machine, but I promise I'll be home early." As soon as he set the phone down, Julian Vance's encrypted call came through. The Sterling COO's voice was in absolute panic. The Sovereign's system was continuously reporting pressure errors at the viewport. 2 internal technicians had been forced to reboot the system, wiping the error codes without ever being allowed to investigate the root cause. Valeria had issued an ultimatum. The contract-signing dive with Arthur Pendleton must happen, and anyone who stood in the way would be crushed. Julian had secretly sent the entire raw maintenance log to Elias via a secure server. Elias had spent 14 years working as a deep-sea structural certification engineer for the military before branching out independently. It only took him 15 minutes of looking at the data charts to realize the horrifying truth. The incident was not a random sensor error. It stemmed from a synthetic rubber pressure gasket located at the rim of the ship's largest tempered glass viewport. This gasket had been replaced during maintenance last week with a component from a batch that did not match the manufacturer's approved specifications. Someone had installed a cheaper replacement part, one that couldn't withstand the pressure at a depth of 2,000 meters, just to avoid waiting 2 weeks for shipping on the genuine batch. and the paperwork had been smoothly signed off by someone at the highest level. Elias immediately printed the emergency suspension file, melted red wax, sealed it with his steel stamp, and stuffed it into his canvas bag along with a decisive piece of evidence. He came to the Mariana Apex dock not for money, but because if the Sovereign dived to the seafloor today, it would become a mass grave upholstered in silk and suede. Returning to the present moment, Valeria's fury flared up, shattering her elegant facade. She took a step forward, facing Elias, her voice hissing through her teeth but still razor-sharp. "Listen here, mechanic. I don't know what game you're trying to play, but everything in this world has its price. Spit it out. How much money do you need to tear up that piece of garbage paper and get out of my sight?" Elias looked at her the way a doctor looks at a psychiatric patient demanding to commit suicide. "My technical report is not a price quote, Miss Sterling." "Then brace yourself," Valeria threatened, oozing murderous intent. "Sterling's legal team will crush your pathetic shop. I will sue you until your son doesn't have a dime to go to college. Your delaying this meeting is stripping me of a $200 million deal. You don't have enough lives to pay for it." Elias did not blink. He slowly reached out, took the gray envelope, personally broke the blazing red wax seal, and emptied all the documents inside, spreading them evenly across the glass table. The pressure deviation charts, the hidden maintenance error codes with their timestamps, the forced system refresh logs, and finally, lying silently on the glass, Sterling's internal approval thread authorizing the use of the non-compliant replacement part. Julian held his breath, his hands gripping the edge of the door tightly. This component was not approved by the independent maintenance department. It was signed off directly from the executive office to race against the presentation schedule for Arthur Pendleton. The fault was not technical. It was a systemic lie, a gamble of lives in exchange for investment capital. Valeria stared intently at the final piece of paper. In the bottom right corner, timestamped from 3 weeks ago, was her own electronic signature. I don't remember signing this document," she stammered, her confidence beginning to crumble. Perhaps her assistant had presented it within a thick stack of files, and she had blindly signed it to save time. Elias didn't look up, his voice ringing out coldly. "You might not remember, but the ocean always remembers." Elias reached into the canvas bag once more, taking out a small, heavy-duty plastic box. Inside was a black pressure gasket, identical to the model currently installed on Valeria's sub. It wasn't large, wasn't shiny, and looked like nothing special for a billionaire to concern herself with. But Elias took out his scratched flashlight, turned on the high-intensity beam, and shone it at an angle onto the edge of the synthetic rubber ring. Under the strong light, a razor-thin white line appeared, a hairline crack as fine as spider silk, perfectly hidden under normal lighting conditions. He explained in the articulate language of a scientist delivering a sentence. "The gasket on your sub was cut from this same defective batch. Do you know what happens if this crack bursts open at a depth of 2,000 meters, Miss Sterling?" Valeria swallowed hard, not daring to answer. "The titanium hull won't implode immediately," Elias described coldly, "but seawater will spray in as a high-pressure cutting jet, as sharp as a laser blade, capable of slicing off the hand of anyone who accidentally touches it. The ship's balancing system will try to compensate for the pressure until it exceeds the safety limits. At that point, the emergency survival protocol will trigger. The ship will automatically blow all its ballast air and shoot straight up to the surface like a torpedo." Elias's gaze locked onto Valeria's eyes, which were wide open in terror. "The sudden change in pressure from the seabed to the surface in less than 3 minutes will cause your lungs to rupture due to decompression sickness. Your blood will bubble. You might not die immediately at the bottom of the sea, but you will survive the rest of your lives in excruciatingly painful disability. And your entire reputation, operating certifications, along with your $200 million empire will sink to the bottom of the ocean, never to surface again." The truth had been laid bare right under the eyes of the arrogant. The veneer of power, the legal threats, and the massive sums of money suddenly became meaningless in the face of the ruthless laws of physics of the deep sea. On the luxurious glass table, sitting among the text-filled documents, was the billionaire's life, being determined by a worker carrying a worn, old bag. The abyssal Sovereign dive cabin sank into a suffocating silence after Elias's chilling warning about decompression sickness. No one dared to move. Even Kalen Cross, the hulking security guard, instinctively stepped back, staring at the technical hatch cover as if it were a ticking time bomb about to detonate. Just then, The piercing sound of the satellite communication system rang out, tearing through the thick atmosphere. On the large, ultra-high-definition OLED screen mounted on the cabin wall, the secure connection icon blinked green. A live video call from the underwater Mariana Trench Resort at a depth of 2,000 meters. The name displayed on the screen made Valeria Sterling jolt in shock, Arthur Pendleton. The billionaire waiting for the signing ceremony had lost his patience. Valeria took a deep breath, her trembling hands immediately smoothing out the wrinkles on her silk robe. She tilted her chin up, forcing her facial muscles to relax into the perfect corporate smile she always used to placate shareholders. She pressed the button to accept the call. The image of Arthur Pendleton appeared clearly. Unlike the flashy appearance of nouveau riche parvenus, Arthur carried the quiet and overwhelming demeanor of a seasoned predatory leopard. He was sitting in an acrylic glass-enclosed underwater living room, with the deep blue of the profound ocean behind him. In his hand was a crystal glass containing amber-colored bourbon. He didn't raise his voice, didn't frown, only asked a brief question. His tone as cold as the temperature outside. Valeria, my time is measured in 6 figures a minute. Why hasn't the sovereign left the dock? Valeria instantly spouted a script that had been perfectly fabricated in her head. Her voice was smooth, full of confidence, trying to turn this life-or-death incident into a trivial administrative nuisance. Arthur, I am so sorry for this delay. We've run into a slight hiccup with the paperwork. A local maintenance mechanic, a subcontractor, working a bit too rigidly to the rules, has overstepped his authority and made a fuss about a false sensor warning. You know how these mediocre blue-collar workers often blow things out of proportion to prove their importance. The captain is dealing with him, and we will be diving right now. Arthur listened, his sharp gray eyes not blinking. He took a sip of his liquor, letting Valeria cover her tracks. But just as she finished speaking, Arthur slowly lowered his glass. He raised a single index finger, a tiny gesture but one holding the power to mute every sound in a boardroom. Did you just say? A local maintenance mechanic. Arthur's voice came through the surround sound system, slow and probing. I just received a notification from the dock's monitoring system about an emergency suspension order. The person who signed it. Is it Elias Thorne? Valeria froze. The smile on her lips turned rigid. Yes, a mechanic claiming to be an inspector. Shut your mouth. Valeria. Those words rang out without a shred of deference, cruel and razor-sharp like a meat cleaver chopping the CEO's sentence in half. Valeria's face went deathly pale. Until now, no one had ever dared to order her to be quiet right on her own ship in front of her own employees. Arthur Pendleton leaned toward the camera, authority exuding from every wrinkle on his forehead. You call him a local maintenance mechanic? Are you talking about Elias Thorne, the former chief engineer of the Federal Maritime Safety Commission? The man who single-handedly rewrote the entire pressure hull certification standard for the Poseidon fleet 8 years ago? The cabin once again sank into silence. Valeria parted her lips to justify herself, but her throat felt as if someone was strangling it. Arthur continued, his tone unhurried but absolutely lethal. 7 years ago, my fund almost poured $500 million into a deep-sea mining conglomerate in the North Sea. It was Elias Thorne who, with a 3-page report, proved their hulls used adulterated alloys. 2 months later, one of those vessels imploded under water pressure. Thorne saved my fund from the worst financial and legal disaster in history. In my world, Valeria, the guarantees of CEOs like you are as cheap as trash. Elias Thorne's seal is the thing cast in iron. Arthur searched through the camera frame. Is Mr. Thorne there? Elias stepped forward, entering the frame. He gave a slight nod. Greetings, Mr. Pendleton. I am Kius. Arthur's demeanor immediately shifted to clear respect. Report directly to me. What is going on with that ship? Valeria stepped forward in a panic, trying to block the camera. Arthur, this is an internal Sterling matter. You can't let an outsider interfere. I told you to shut your mouth, Arthur roared, the sound shaking the entire speaker system. I haven't signed the check, which means that ship is preparing to carry my money. Step back, Valeria, immediately. Valeria bit her lip until it bled, stepping back in humiliation before the stunned eyes of the crew. She, the queen of the Sterling Empire, was now reduced to a helpless spectator in her own kingdom. Elias looked straight into the camera, not adding any flowery language. He used data to finish off the lies. This ship is not seaworthy, Mr. Pendleton. The pressure valve manifold of the viewport has been replaced with a cheap component from a discarded batch. The fault does not lie at the technical level but at the executive level. They used board-level privileges to override safety warnings, forcing the installation of a non-compliant component just to shorten the ship's turnaround time in time for today's presentation. If this ship sinks to 2,000 meters, the hull will lose pressure, and the emergency ballast blow procedure will kill every passenger inside. Arthur closed his eyes for 2 seconds, absorbing the information. When he opened his eyes, his gaze was aimed straight at Valeria like a loaded gun. A systemic lie in exchange for investment money, Arthur concluded coldly. Right at that moment, something no one expected happened. Julian Vance, the who was always timid and fearful of Valeria's power, unexpectedly stepped into the frame, standing next to Elias. The power vacuum that Arthur created had liberated him from the grip of fear. "Mr. Pendleton." Julian's voice trembled, but the volume was loud enough to echo throughout the cabin. "I am Julian Vance, Chief Operating Officer. What Mr. Thorne says is the absolute truth. I myself reported the pressure warnings multiple times to Miss Sterling last week, but she ordered me to clear the error codes and forced the maintenance team to keep their mouths shut. If Mr. Thorne hadn't come here today, we would have pushed you into a titanium coffin." Valeria looked at Julian as if looking at a knife that had just been plunged into her back. "Julian, you're fired. You dare betray me. You no longer have the right to fire anyone, Valeria," Arthur Pendleton coldly declared. Ending all of the CEO's struggles, the billionaire set his glass of liquor down on the table, laced his hands together, with the demeanor of a judge preparing to pass a sentence. "The $200 million contract is officially cancelled as of this second. I do not invest my money in a conglomerate that treats human life as a cuttable expense." Arthur turned to Elias. "Mr. Thorne, I request you to be the head of the Independent Audit Committee. You have full authority to freeze Sterling Corporation's entire fleet of submersibles, inspect all records, all components going back 5 years. All costs for this investigation will be covered by Pendleton Global." "I accept," Elias replied crisply. "Excellent," Arthur said, then glanced at Valeria one last time with utter contempt. "A broken component can be replaced in an hour, but a rotten corporate culture, ready to humiliate those who speak the truth to cover up the arrogance of the elite, no amount of money can salvage that. Good luck with the federal investigations, Valeria." The screen went black. The silent blackness of the monitor reflected the pale, shattered face of Valeria Sterling. Her empire had collapsed, not by a natural disaster, nor by the fierce competition of the market. It collapsed from within, crushed by her own arrogance, right at the trial, convened at a depth of 2,000 meters. And the one who delivered the sentence, ironically, was standing right there, quietly packing his tools into the worn canvas bag crusted with sea salt, the bag she had once considered trash. 4 days after the horrific event at the Mariana Apex dock, Valeria Sterling's world had completely flipped upside down. No miracle occurred to save her empire. That very night, the Sterling Corporation Board of Directors convened an emergency meeting. The decision was made swiftly and uncompromisingly. Valeria was indefinitely suspended from all executive positions. The Federal Maritime Safety Investigation Bureau dispatched dozens of special agents to lock down the headquarters, sealing all servers and maintenance records. Sterling's stock price plummeted uncontrollably, evaporating hundreds of millions of dollars within just hours of the market opening. Arthur Pendleton withdrew completely, taking with him both the lifeblood and the future of the submersible fleet. Late one afternoon, as the faint rays of the setting sun were dyeing the dilapidated industrial port in the suburbs gold, a standard black sedan quietly pulled up in front of Elias Thorne's corrugated tin-roofed repair shop. There was no entourage of black-suited bodyguards to open the door. There were no assistants holding umbrellas or carrying files. The car door opened, and Valeria stepped out. She wore a light gray trench coat. Her platinum blonde hair, that had once been proudly pinned up high, now hung loose over her shoulders, revealing a haggard face. Her eyes deeply marked with dark circles from 4 sleepless nights, dealings with lawyers and federal investigators. The shell of an elite queen had been stripped away, leaving only a woman facing the pile of ashes she had ignited with her own hands. She hesitantly stepped into the shop. The space inside reeked of lube oil, rust, and the salty tang of the sea breeze. The screech of a metal cutter echoed periodically. In the corner of the shop, Elias Thorne was bent over a tarnished engine block, the blinding blue light from the welding machine casting shadows on his sweat-bated face. He knew she had arrived, but he didn't stop working. Elias finished the rest of his weld, took off his protective mask, and wiped his hands on a rough cloth towel before turning to look at her. There was no fawning, nor was there any triumph. He looked at her as calmly as he would any passing visitor. Valeria stood there, her eyes involuntarily sweeping over the cluttered plywood workbench. Right in the middle of the table, lying quietly next to heavy wrenches, was the worn, waterproof canvas bag crusted with sea salt, the bag that just 4 days ago she had glared at with utter contempt. The bag she had ordered her hulking security guard to rummage through in front of so many people, as if to humiliate its owner. Today, she stood less than a meter away from it, but absolutely dared not touch it. She no longer viewed it as a piece of trash dirtying her luxurious cabin. The inversion of power was complete. The thing once considered garbage now radiated a majesty that forced a former CEO to approach it with wariness. "Are you satisfied, Elias?" Valeria spoke, breaking the silence. Her voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual commanding tone. "The board of directors dismissed me. The sovereign fleet is indefinitely grounded. All contracts are cancelled. The corporation my family built over 3 generations is on the brink of bankruptcy. You single-handedly destroyed my empire with just a piece of rubber gasket." Elias grabbed a bottle of filtered water, twisted off the cap, took a sip, and set it down on the table. "A piece of rubber gasket cannot destroy an empire, Miss Sterling," Elias replied, his voice calm. But every word cut deep into Valeria's mind. "Your arrogance is what destroyed it. Greed, and the fact that you weighed the lives of passengers lighter than the schedule of a meeting, are what dragged you to the bottom of the sea." Valeria bit her lip hard, trying to cling to her last shred of dignity. "You don't understand my world, Elias. In my position, a one-day delay can cause millions of dollars to evaporate. Every aviation or maritime CEO has to learn how to balance risk and profit. Perfection is the enemy of progress. I only did what I had to do to keep this company in the lead. Don't use empty business buzzwords to justify a crime," Elias cut in, his eyes hardening, exuding a pressure that made Valeria take a half step back. "The ocean doesn't care about your financial reports. Pressure at a depth of 2.0 meters does not compromise with shareholders, and seawater has no concept of balancing risk. In my world, an erroneous signature means you strip away someone's chance to see the sun one more time. The people who pay the price for your optimization have never been the ones sitting in velvet-carpeted executive suites." Elias's words smashed through Valeria's last feeble lines of defense. She let her arms drop, her shoulders, always tensed with pride, now slumped in exhaustion. There were no cameras, no Arthur Pendleton, no press. In this dingy shop, Valeria finally allowed herself to face the naked truth. She took a step forward, her eyes stopping at the worn canvas bag, then looked up straight at Elias. "I am sorry," she said. It was not an apology polished word by word by a PR team. It was raw, broken, and genuine. "I looked at your bag, looked at your clothes, and I believed I knew your exact worth. I thought you were just a lowly nobody wanting to extort money or gain attention. I misjudged entirely. I let arrogance blind me. And I almost killed myself along with the others. You were right, Elias. The ocean remembers everything, and it has made me pay the price." That moment carried the weight of redemption. Elias did not trample her further, nor did he mock the downfall of a superior. He understood that the greatest punishment for an arrogant person is the exact moment they tear off their own mask and admit their stupidity. Elias gave a slight nod, his features relaxing. "I acknowledge your apology, Valeria, but the person you owe the biggest apology to is not me." Valeria looked at him in bewilderment. "You owe Julian Vance an apology," Elias stated clearly. "You owe the captain. You owe the maintenance technical team. They were the ones who discovered the fault, who warned you, but were gagged by your power and threats of termination. They had to bear the fear and the pangs of conscience every night, knowing something wrong was happening without being able to speak up. They are the true victims of the toxic corporate culture you created." Valeria stood in stunned silence. Profound realization flooded her eyes. For many years, she had considered her employees merely unthinking cogs in a money-printing machine. Elias's words had awakened the last remaining shred of humanity within her. She nodded slowly. "I understand. Thank you, Elias." Valeria turned and walked toward the shop door. Her silhouette was cast upon the ground under the fading sunset, solitary and small, in stark contrast to the image of the haughty queen stepping out of the helicopter 4 days ago. She had lost an empire, but perhaps she had reclaimed the first lesson in being human. Elias stood watching the black sedan fade away past the street corner. He returned to his workbench, unzipped the canvas bag, and carefully took out the familiar spiral-bound notebook. He flipped to a brand new page, uncapped his marker, and painstakingly wrote a note that wasn't about technical specifications or pressure. Never let the grubby appearance of the one holding the evidence deceive the one who desperately needs to hear the truth. He closed the notebook, slipped it into the worn old bag, and then pulled the shop's main breaker. The lights went out, giving way to the peaceful silence of the falling night. A month passed since the earthquake that toppled the Sterling Empire in the Maldives. Its aftershocks had shaken the entire global deep-sea exploration industry, but on the edge of the dilapidated industrial port, the rhythm of Elias Thorne's life seemed entirely undisturbed. He still woke up at 4:30 in the morning, still drove a rusting Ford pickup truck that had run over 300,000 miles, and still spent hours grinding mechanical details in the tin-roofed shop reeking of lube oil and sea salt. The worn waterproof canvas bag, the thing that had become a legend in the maritime world, still rested peacefully on his cluttered workbench, next to the heavy wrenches. Elias didn't use the lucrative consulting contract from the Pendleton Global Fund to buy a sports car or move into an expensive penthouse. He understood that luxury is something that easily erodes the sharpening of an engineer. His strength did not lie in bespoke tailored suits, but in those smudged hands that always directly touched the truth of metal blocks. However, even though Elias did not change, the way the world viewed him had completely changed. The disdainful stares, the mocking smirks when he stepped onto a luxury dock were gone. Now, when the silhouette of the man wearing the frayed canvas jacket appeared, a quiet reverence immediately descended. The most powerful Wall Street investors now understood. An approval signature from Elias Thorne held a far greater weight of guarantee than hundreds of pages of polished marketing strategy. Arthur Pendleton had officially founded the Global Deep Sea Exploration Safety Council and placed Elias in the chief advisor seat, granting him ultimate veto power over any submersible project seeking capital from his fund. In another development, internally, the Sterling Corporation was undergoing a bloody but necessary major surgery. Julian Vance, who had once lived cowering in the shadow of fear of Valeria, had now been promoted by the board of directors to Director of Internal Safety. The lesson in the Maldives had been carved deep into his mind. Julian's first act upon taking office was establishing the Thorne Protocol, an anonymous reporting system and emergency suspension authority. From now on, any welder, mechanic, or low-level technician had the right to press the red button to halt a dive if a risk was detected, and no executive was allowed to override it. No longer would anyone have to bear the fear of knowing the truth but being forced to swallow it back down for the sake of their livelihood. The truth, finally, had a space to breathe freely. The final scene of the story did not take place in a dingy machine shop, but stretched out beneath the brilliant golden sunshine of the Mediterranean. Port Hercules in the Principality of Monaco, the mecca of the ultra-rich where superyachts moored closely together like floating palaces. On the teak deck of a massive research yacht, the elite were gathering to witness the launch of a new generation deep-sea submersible prototype. Champagne bubbled in baccarat crystal glasses, the melodic sound of jazz blended with the lively chatter and laughter of billionaires, politicians, and maritime designers dressed in crisp white linen suits. Elias Thorne appeared at the gangway. He was still himself. The rubber boots bearing scratch marks, the familiar windbreaker canvas jacket, and slung across his shoulder was the faded gray waterproof bag. He walked steadily on the expensive teak floor, his presence creating a jarring dissonance with the flawless oil painting of the surrounding upper class. A young investment director, with slicked-back hair, wearing a bespoke suit tailored in Milan, was standing by the railing with a group of tycoons. When he saw Elias walk by, the corner of his lips immediately curled up, forming the familiar contemptuous smile of those who had never tasted the bitterness of the ocean. "Good Lord, look at that!" The young director threw a sarcastic remark, jerking his chin toward Elias. "Is the organizing committee loose on security? Or is the yacht's plumbing clogged so they had to call a drain cleaner up here? Look at his trash bag." A few chuckles rang out from the group around him, but before that smile could fully form on his lips, a massive, rough hand clamped tightly onto his shoulder, the force so strong it made him wince in pain. Standing right behind him was Captain Renault, a true sea wolf with a silver-flecked beard, his chest pinned full of maritime rescue medals. The old captain's eyes shot out razor-sharp glares, pinning straight into the young director's paling face. "Shut your arrogant mouth, sir." Captain Renault growled, his voice deep but carrying the weight of a mountain. He jutted his chin toward Elias's fading back. "Do you know who that man is? That is Elias Thorne. You might be able to buy this yacht. You might be able to buy the expensive bottles of wine you're drinking. But when you crawl into a metal cage and sink to the bottom of the ocean, where sunlight never reaches and the pressure is enough to crush your bones to dust, then your money is just a pile of worthless scrap paper. The young director swallowed hard, not daring to utter a word. The old captain released his shoulder, his eyes gleaming with absolute reverence as he watched Elias's worn bag. Whatever is inside that ragged canvas bag, Captain Renault said slowly and clearly so that everyone around could hear, could be the sole reason we have enough life left to return to the surface and see the sunlight today. Never spit on your savior just because he isn't wearing a nice suit. The surrounding crowd fell dead silent. The champagne glasses stopped swirling. The arrogance of the upper class was once again suffocated by the naked truth of nature and those who guard it. 10 yards away, Elias Thorne still heard the conversation. But he didn't stop walking. He didn't turn back to enjoy the triumph. Nor did he break into a satisfied smile. His ego did not need to be fed by the adoration of others. He continued walking toward the submersible, waiting for inspection. The deep ocean out there did not care about the human ego. It did not favor the rich, nor did it pity the poor. It only respected the truth, accurate physical numbers, and absolute honesty. Elias lightly tightened his grip on the canvas bag's strap on his shoulder. That bag contained no magic, contained no weapons, and contained no diamonds. It only contained the tools to measure the truth. And sometimes, the thing that makes an entire arrogant world hold its breath is not a billion-dollar bank account, but a tiny piece of evidence resting safely in the hands of someone who refuses to sell out the truth in exchange for a fake peace. That is the ultimate boundary. The boundary separating life and death between the flashy facade and true value. And Elias Thorne, the repairman carrying the worn canvas bag, will forever be the guardian standing at that boundary.